final part of my 1934 World Cup videos regarding the round of 16 or round 1. So final 4 teams I'm going to discuss. These teams are Austria, France, Hungary and Egypt. Austria took on France and Egypt took on Hungary. This is Austria's very first time at the World Cup. France, one of the original 13 teams that made the trip back in 1930. And we've got Hungary, who are also making their debut for the first time, and Egypt making their debut as well. Egypt also being the first nation from Africa to debut at a World Cup. I'm going to show the score lines quickly down there, or there, or wherever I decide to put it. So we've got Austria, they defeated France 3-2, and Hungary defeated Egypt 4-2. The match between France and Austria was the very first game in World Cup history to go into extra time. And I believe it was 1-0. 1-0. It drawed in the first 90 minutes, and then in the second of extra time, Austria managed to win it 3-2. Yeah. And Hungary did well, started off well, leading 2-0 against Egypt. Egypt did do a comeback, but at the end of the second half, Hungary was able to turn that around or win again. These 4 nations I mentioned, France is the only one of these 4 that has hosted a World Cup. They end up hosting the next World Cup after 1934, hosted the 1938 World Cup. They also hosted the World Cup in 1998, which they won for the first time. Also, should mention that Hungary do end up reaching the final of the 1938 World Cup, only of the same one that France does host, and they also reached the final again in 1954. Austria, on the other hand, has reached 2 semi-finals themselves, this being one of them. And Egypt, on the other hand, out of the 4 nations, they haven't qualified for the World Cup as much. They've reached 3 World Cups, but have failed to qualify for multiple ones, or at least 2 in a row, I should say. They're kind of, spaced out. So in 1934, they returned in 1990, and then the most recent World Cup they qualified for was the 2018 World Cup. So there's big gaps, basically. But yeah, these are 4 nations. I'm in Rome right now. Alright, quick edit. Gonna head off to the Stadio Flaminio, which is the current name of the stadium, which was originally called the Stadio Nazionale Stadium. No, it's that stadium twice, but yeah, that was the original name. Was called that during the 1934 World Cup. See, it got demolished in the 50s, then renamed. Currently though, it's not an active stadium, as I mentioned a few times, but I'm going to head there now. That is, again, the stadium where the very first match, or final, I should say, between 2 European nations, which is quite a common thing at World Cup finals. It's either 2 European nations or 1 European and 1 South American nation. So Italy and Czechoslovakia were the first 2 European nations to reach a final of the World Cup. Anyway, thanks again for watching, listening, appreciate it as usual, and I'm going to be there now. Back here again in the Stadio Flaminio, originally named as the Stadio Nazi, something like that. Nazionale, originally. And as mentioned in the past, in the last video, this was the stadium where the final the last game between Czechoslovakia and Italy took place. But this is my part 4, round of 16 or round 1 video. Now we're going to discuss the last 4 nations, by the way, that battled with each other in the 1934 World Cup. You have Hungary, who took on Egypt, and that's the first time an African nation and a nation from Europe played each other at the World Cup. These days it would be a nation from the UEFA taking on a nation from the CAF or CAF. And another game that took place was the match between France and Austria. France are the only ones out of the 4 nations that I just mentioned that have played in a previous World Cup. They also happen to be the first nation to have a player score. Laurent scored for France, becoming France's, and Lucien Laurent, became France's very first goal scorer and also the first ever player to score a goal at the World Cup. He also did compete at the 1934 World Cup as well. The 3 nations making their debut is Hungary, Egypt, and Austria. I'm going to start off with a game between Austria and France. This game also goes down as the very first World Cup game to go into extra time. All right, back then, I should have mentioned this. I haven't mentioned this in the past. I probably have. But if a game goes into 90 minutes at this World Cup, extra time would have been played, 30 minutes of extra time. And after those 30 minutes were up, these days it would be going to penalties, but back then you would have had a replay. And a replay happens in the quarterfinals, but I'll mention that later. All right, so this game between France and Austria did go into extra time. France were leading though. France did lead this game. I should also mention the stadium. Mentioned before, it's the Stadio Olimpico Grande Torino, named after the Gran Torino team one of the best Torino teams. They won 5 Serie A's in the 1940s. Sadly, they passed away in an air disaster in 1949, which did make up the bulk of the Italian team in 1950. So tragic. They probably could have retained the World Cup. We'll never know. But yeah, that's the stadium's renamed that. Originally, the stadium's original name was named after Benito Mussolini. Right. So in this match between the French and Austria, the French were leading. A goal from... One second. Goal from Nicolas for France. He scored 4 goals during qualifiers. France qualified by defeating Luxembourg. They were in the same group as Germany. Both Germany and France defeated Luxembourg very comfortably, both teams. And because of that, both teams didn't actually have to play each other. They both qualified. Each team would only have to play each other once. And that's how France and Germany qualified. So France was leading. But an equaliser for Austria still in the first half. Sindlia became Austria's very first goal scorer at a World Cup, equalising in the first half, making it 1-1. He himself also scored during qualifiers. He scored the last goal for Austria
in their 6-1 win over Bulgaria. Both Austria and Hungary qualified in their group against Bulgaria. So that's how Austria qualified. The game, no one scored in the second half, which meant that the game went into extra time. And as mentioned, this would be the first ever time a World Cup fixture went into extra time. And Austria managed to score 2 goals. First goal in the first half of extra time, Skill Hall scored, and then in the second half of extra time, Bican scored, making it 3-1 for Austria. France did get a goal back. Versetti doesn't even sound like Tommy when I look at the spelling of this. But Verest scored a penalty for France. I believe that would also be France's first ever penalty scored at a World Cup. Don't believe in 1930 they did score a penalty. So, yeah, for France, it ended up just being a consolation for France. They couldn't do anything more in that game. Austria managed to defeat France, knocking out France as another one of the original 13 nations to get knocked out. And I guess now I might as well mention none of the original 13 teams, the 6 teams that competed at the first World Cup and also competed at the second World Cup as well, none of them went through. They were all knocked out by the new batch, every one of them, as I mentioned. Now this would be the last tie. I mentioned that a original 13 team will be mentioned. Well, they probably will be mentioned, but not in competing. So yeah, they got knocked out, and now France, guess it's another setback for France, in a way. You know, had a good start in this. Again, it's another comeback. That seems to be a common thing, at least I think in most of this. That would a comeback in 1934 World Cup. It looked like a lot of teams end up making comebacks. So yeah, that's France knocked out. France do end up hosting the next World Cup after 1934. They hosted the 1938 World Cup. Did well in that. That's the first time they went past the first round, I should mention as well. End up losing to Italy in the quarterfinals. Italy go on to winning that World Cup as well. And France again do host another World Cup. They end up hosting the World Cup in 98, which would have been 60 years after 1938. And this time around, they do end up winning the World Cup in 1998. France do end up playing Italy, funny enough, in the final in 2006, where they lost on penalties. They do end up winning the World Cup again, though, in 2018, where they defeated Croatia. Croatia's the same team that they defeated in the semi-finals of the 1998 World Cup on their way to winning it. And finally, France are the most recent team to suffer heartache after being defeated once again on penalties in the World Cup in 2022 in Qatar, this time around losing to Argentina. And I guess I mentioned in the past, France was Argentina's first ever World Cup opponents. All right then. Yeah, that's me on the Austria. Gonna move on quickly. Austria and France, I should say. So, okay. Now, last fixture of the last 16 or the round of 16. That would be the match between Hungary and Egypt, which was the first ever tie in a World Cup between a nation from UEFA, from Europe, and a nation from Africa, from the CAF, going up against each other. An interesting tie. Also, I should mention as well that this is only the second tie where two debuting nations will compete against each other in the round of 16 of the 1934 World Cup. So, Hungary, mentioned how they qualified, kind of mentioned it earlier, they qualified with Austria. Hungary was able to defeat Bulgaria home and away, and Bulgaria decided to withdraw, meaning that both Hungary and Austria didn't have to play each other, and both nations qualified. How Egypt qualified, they were in the same group as Palestine, British Mandate. That nation or that team would eventually become the current Israel team. So they're not the successor, or the current Palestine team isn't the successor to that team. I should also mention as well that Turkey was in the same group as both Egypt and Palestine Mandate, a British Mandate, but they did withdraw. Palestine British Mandate lost to Egypt on two occasions. Two quick, easy, comfortable wins for Egypt, and that's how Egypt became the first African nation to qualify for a World Cup and compete at the World Cup. They would have been the first back in 1930. Unfortunately, because of a storm in the Mediterranean Sea, they missed their boat and they wasn't able to qualify for the very first World Cup in 1930. This time around, still speaking of Mediterranean, a lot quicker trip for Egypt to get to Italy this time around to compete, and they was able to make the trip. All right, let's talk about the match now. Hungary did start off well in this game against Egypt. They started off well, getting 2 goals in the first half. First goal from Teleki, and that makes him the very first scorer for Hungary at a World Cup. So, great start. And Toldi for Hungary scored a second goal. He also scored in qualifying. But Frauzi for Egypt, who did score in the qualifying rounds in the second game against Palestine British Mandate. He scored in that game against them, the second match, I believe it was. He became Egypt's first ever goal scorer and also the first African player to ever score at a World Cup. He also bagged in a second goal still in the first half, making him the first player to get 2 goals. And he was denied a hat-trick. He would have been the first African player to ever score a hat-trick at the World Cup, something that still has not happened as I speak. That still hasn't happened yet. Second half, though, comes around. Hungary do restore their lead. What's his name? Vinci managed to score, making it 3-2. And Toldi gets the second goal for Hungary, making him the first Hungarian to score 2 goals in a game at the World Cup. And with that, Hungary managed to knock out the very first African nation to compete at the World Cup. It's a win for Hungary, and that has them move on to the next round. I should say this about Egypt. They have a really good record at the African Cup of Nations, but when it does come to the World Cup, they haven't qualified for many World Cups. After 1934, they withdraw from the 1938 World Cup and either withdraw or fail to flat out qualify for many of the World Cups afterwards. They actually don't qualify for another World Cup till 1990, where Italy hosts the World Cup for a second time. The last time Egypt has qualified for a World Cup was 2018 World Cup, where they were in the same group as the hosts, Russia. Currently, as I speak, the 2026 World Cup CEF qualifiers, they look in a really, I don't know if I go to say a really good position, but they probably will qualify for this upcoming World Cup. So we'll see then. Hungary, on the other hand, the UEFA's World Cup qualifiers hasn't started yet. We'll see how well they do. It's been quite a while since they've qualified themselves. Anyway, let's move on. I think that's the final part of my World Cup qualifiers. No, World Cup qualifiers. I've done that video already. Sorry. This is my final part of my World Cup round of 16 or round 1 World Cup matches. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it as usual. I'll probably head down here one more time. I don't know if I'm going to head there tomorrow. I might sort of have a bit of a relaxing day tomorrow. I don't know. I'll go to a different area. Probably try and find a Coliseum or something like that. But this is good. I'm happy to come here again. Another stadium in the finals. This is two times in the last 2 months that I've been to a World Cup final stadium. You know, it's not the same experience and that, but it's still cool regardless. I like coming here as well, and it's been nice heading to Rome. Italy has always been on my bucket list. I've always wanted to come here. In general, outside of football, I've always wanted to come here. Italian food is probably one of my favourites in the world to taste and that, so I'm happy to come here. It's good. Anyway, that's me done. Thanks for watching, listening. I appreciate it as usual. And once again, bye.